The report arrived just before dawn. A French colonial officer unfolded the message and stared at it in silence. Then he read it again, and again, because what it described made no sense. An African army, they believed, had been cornered hundreds of miles. A way had suddenly appeared somewhere else entirely. Villages that had sworn loyalty to France were gone. Supply routes had vanished. Fortifications stood abandoned. And the enemy they thought they understood was already moving beyond their reach. Weeks earlier, French commanders had celebrated what they believed was a decisive victory. Now they were receiving reports of disciplined columns appearing out of the dust. Armed, organized, adaptable, dangerously intelligent. Nothing was behaving the way colonial warfare was supposed to behave. This enemy did not fight according to European expectations. He refused to stand still, refused to die, refused to surrender. When they advanced, he disappeared. When they relaxed, he struck. When they believed they had destroyed his power, he somehow emerged stronger somewhere else. And perhaps most alarming of all, the weapons. The rifles carried by his soldiers were no longer the crude firearms Europeans expected to face. Something had changed. Someone was learning. Someone was adapting. Someone was building a military machine unlike anything French officers had encountered in West Africa. Years later, many of those same commanders would admit they had spent nearly 2 decades chasing a man who always seemed one step ahead. A man who understood that survival was sometimes more powerful than victory. A man whose resistance would become one of the longest and most sophisticated anti-colonial struggles in African history. While a Queen Mother was rising in the east to defend her sacred golden stool, in the west another figure was already deep into a war that would leave one of Europe's greatest empires frustrated, exhausted, and bewildered. His name was Samori Touré, and this is the story of the man who rebuilt an empire rather than kneel. Long before French columns marched into the interior of West Africa, the land stretching across parts of modern Guinea, Mali, Senegal, and Côte d'Ivoire were alive with movement. Caravans crossed dusty trade routes. Merchants exchanged gold, kola nuts, livestock, and cloth. Drums carried messages between distant settlements. Islamic scholars copied sacred texts beneath shaded courtyards. Farmers worked fertile lands passed down through generations. And among the peoples who shaped this world were the Mandinka. Their history stretched back centuries. They carried memories of ancient kingdoms, of powerful rulers, of warriors and traders, of cities that connected Africa to vast networks reaching across the Sahara and beyond. This was not an isolated world. It was connected, dynamic, complex, yet beneath its rhythms lay constant uncertainty. Raids, rivalries, slave trading networks, political struggles. Fortunes could rise and collapse with astonishing speed. And it was within this world that a young boy named Samori would learn one of life's harshest lessons. His mother was captured, taken away, dragged into slavery. For many, such a tragedy would become a story of grief. For Samori, it became the beginning of transformation. Determined to secure her freedom, he entered the service of those who had taken her. 4 years he observed, learned, adapted. He studied men. He studied power. He studied warfare. The experience changed him forever, because while others saw chaos, Samori saw patterns. And where others saw obstacles, he saw opportunities. When his mother was eventually freed, he emerged from the ordeal carrying something far more valuable than wealth. Knowledge. Knowledge that would one day help him challenge an empire. At first, Samori was a trader. He traveled, negotiated, built relationships, learned how goods moved across vast distances, learned how communities survived, learned how influence could travel farther than armies. But West Africa in the 19th century rewarded strength as much as diplomacy. Gradually, Samori's ambitions expanded. He gathered followers, built alliances, commanded warriors, and step by step, he transformed himself from merchant to military leader. The rise was not sudden. It was deliberate, patient, calculated. Each victory brought new recruits. Each alliance brought new resources. Each challenge taught new lessons. Before long, a powerful new state began taking shape around him. The Wassoulou Empire. An empire not inherited. An empire not gifted. An empire built from almost nothing. As rival leaders fought over territory, Samori focused on something deeper. Organization, discipline, structure. He understood a truth many overlooked. Armies are not made powerful by courage alone. They are made powerful by systems, training, leadership, logistics, purpose. So he built them. His soldiers trained relentlessly. Command structures became increasingly sophisticated. Units learned to maneuver with discipline. Supply networks supported long campaigns. Messengers carried information rapidly across great distances. The result was remarkable. An African military force capable of operating on a scale that surprised even its enemies. Then came the Europeans. By the late 19th century, France was expanding aggressively across West Africa. Colonial officials viewed much of the region through the lens of superiority. Resistance was expected. Defeat was assumed. Many French commanders believed African forces would collapse once confronted by modern European armies. That assumption would prove costly. The first major encounters exposed a reality they had not anticipated. Samori was not a local chief defending a single village. He was a strategist, a planner, a state builder, and he had spent years preparing. French officers expected straightforward battles. Instead, they encountered mobility, flexibility, and an enemy who refused to play by their rules. Victories became complicated. Defeats became temporary. Every campaign seemed to create new problems. Every advance carried hidden costs. And with each passing year, Samori became more dangerous. Because he was learning. One of his greatest strengths was his willingness to adapt. Many leaders faced European expansion by relying on traditional methods alone. Samori did something different. He studied the changing nature of warfare. He recognized that firearms would shape the future. So he pursued them relentlessly. Weapons were acquired through trade, captured from enemies, purchased through networks stretching across the region. Then came something even more remarkable. His craftsmen learned to repair rifles, maintain them, eventually reproduce components. Workshops emerged, knowledge spread, skills improved. The transformation was extraordinary. An army once viewed as technologically inferior was becoming increasingly capable of sustaining itself. French commanders noticed, and it worried them, because every rifle repaired was another battle prolonged. Every weapon maintained was another obstacle to conquest. Every innovation meant the war would continue. And continue it did. Year after year, campaign after campaign. The struggle evolved into one of endurance. French forces advanced. Samori withdrew. French officers celebrated. Samori reappeared. French maps were updated. Samori changed the battlefield. Again, and again, and again. To outside observers, some of these withdrawals appeared to be defeats, retreats, signs of weakness, but they misunderstood what they were witnessing. Samori was not simply retreating. He was preserving his strength, protecting his people, buying time, turning geography into a weapon. Then came one of the most astonishing decisions of his entire career. A decision almost unimaginable. A dramatic pause. Imagine ruling an empire. Imagine seeing powerful enemies closing in from multiple directions. Imagine knowing that staying in place may doom everything you have built. Most rulers would make a final stand. Most rulers would gamble everything on one desperate battle. Samori chose something else. He dismantled his empire. Not because he was defeated, because he refused to let it be captured. Entire communities moved. Families gathered possessions. Livestock traveled across vast distances. Officials relocated. Warriors protected long columns stretching across the landscape. Dust filled the air. The old empire faded behind them. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. The French pursued what they thought was a collapsing state. Instead, they were chasing a moving civilization. And before they fully understood what had happened, Samori began building again. A second center of power, a second foundation, a second empire. It was one of the most extraordinary acts of strategic relocation in African history. The French could seize territory, but territory was not the source of his power. His people were. His institutions were. His leadership was. And those things remained intact. For years, the struggle continued. The cost grew heavier. Communities suffered. Resources diminished. Pressure intensified. French forces expanded. Allies disappeared. Trade routes became harder to control. The balance slowly shifted. Even the greatest strategist cannot fight forever against overwhelming industrial power. Yet Samori never stopped adapting, never stopped resisting, never stopped searching for another move, another path, another possibility. By the late 1890s, however, the walls were closing in. French military networks had expanded dramatically. More troops arrived. More resources flowed into the campaign. The space available for maneuver narrowed. The circle tightened. Then, in 1898, after 17 years of resistance against French expansion, Samori Touré was finally captured. Not on a glorious battlefield surrounded by banners, not in a dramatic last stand, but through persistence, relentless pursuit, the slow grinding pressure of a colonial machine determined to end his challenge once and for all. A dramatic pause. For nearly 2 decades, one man had forced a European empire to devote enormous attention, resources, and manpower to a single struggle. Now the war was over, but the story was not. Samori was exiled to Gabon, far from the lands he had fought to defend, far from the people who had followed him across rivers, forests, and endless miles of dust. There, in exile, he spent his final years. In 1900, he died. Yet even in death, the questions remained. Why had the French feared him so deeply? The answer was simple. He challenged their assumptions. He demonstrated that African resistance could be organized, strategic, innovative, modern. He proved that leadership was not measured only by territory held, but by the ability to adapt when circumstances changed. He refused to become predictable. And unpredictability is one of the most dangerous weapons in war. Today, his legacy stretches across national borders. In Guinea, he is remembered as a founding figure of resistance. In Mali, Senegal, and across West Africa, his story remains woven into collective memory. Not because he won every battle. He did not. Not because he preserved his empire forever. He could not. But because he refused to surrender the future without a fight. His life reminds us that resistance is not always about victory. Sometimes it is about endurance. Sometimes it is about preserving dignity. Sometimes it is about forcing history to remember that people stood their ground even when the odds were impossible. And perhaps that is the deeper truth hidden beneath his story. For generations, many histories portrayed African resistance as scattered, disorganized, and hopelessly outmatched. But leaders like Samori Touré tell a different story. A story of strategy, of statecraft, of military innovation, of people who studied their enemies, adapted to changing realities, and fought with extraordinary determination. Last time, we told you about a queen mother who stood up when the chief sat down. Today, we told you about a commander who rebuilt an empire twice rather than kneel. Africa did not go quietly. And now we want to hear from you. Between Yera Santawa and Samori Touré, whose form of resistance do you think required the greater sacrifice? The leader who rallied a nation to defend a sacred symbol? Or the commander who uprooted an entire empire to keep the struggle alive? Tell us in the comments below. If stories like this fascinate you, subscribe to Dark African Chronicles and turn on notifications. Because these are not just stories from Africa's past. They are stories the world was never supposed to forget. And somewhere in the shadows of history, another extraordinary figure is waiting. A ruler, a rebel, a visionary, a name many have never heard. A story that changes everything you thought you knew. And when that story arrives, you will not want to miss it.